And this event is hosted by UWUX, and we're a student community based at the University of Waterloo. Our mission is to grow the student, UX, and product design community by hosting workshops and events like this. So be sure to check out our Slack and follow us on our social media so we can continue to hosting these types of events and foster a more inclusive and involved design community. Now, we can introduce our first speaker, Jackie. Jackie is a new media artist and product designer. By day, she leads product design at schoolhouse.world, a peer tutoring platform where students can give and receive help. And separately, she's building a technology-related art practice as a current member of New Inc., an arts incubator based in New York. And for today, she'll be talking about designing to heal, sharing lessons and ongoing questions from her journey, creating work that blends art, design, and computation, as well as exploring healing at various scales, personal, collective, and systemic. So yeah, thank you, Jackie, for being with us here today. Let me know if you need to share your slide, share your screen or anything. Yeah, okay, perfect.
Yeah, sure now. Cool, yeah, can see it. Cool, yeah, I'll go get started. Hopefully I stick to the 25 minutes. I did practice a little bit. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I'll start by talking about myself a little bit. So I am based in the US. I grew up in New Jersey. I'm currently living in Brooklyn, New York, as we speak. I am a product designer and have worked in ed tech nonprofit spaces. But I also have this sort of like larger creative personal art practice in the category of new media art. And I think that means a lot of things to different people. But for me, it means I, create artwork with and about sort of technology. And something that I'm also doing in my work is thinking a lot about like the theme of healing, which I think is a thread that connects my art, my personal life, as well as the work that I do as a designer. Yeah, so I know this is an event for designing around social impact. And the thing that I'd like to kind of explore and talk about with you all today is this notion of like designing around social impact is kind of essentially the same thing as around designing around the theme of healing. So, designing for social impact means you're looking at systems of harm, you're mitigating and making interventions to build a better world. And I think that's what the essence of healing is as well. And what I'll do today is to share like a kind of winding story about how I've thought about healing in my own life to the work that I do in my art practice, and then also connect it to the context of doing design work in industry, and hope that this can be kind of a unique or a little bit of a different perspective to take away as you all kind of progress through the design world. Yeah, and before starting, I'll just add some disclaimers. Like I'm not like formally trained in any sort of like therapy or mental health work. I'm an artist and designer. So this is sort of my interpretations and synthesis. And I'm building off of a lot of like important work that are done by others. And if I wrote up this talk in like kind of a paper format, I would love to like kind of spend more time citing them. I recognize that I have a lot of privileges as someone who was able to get like a lot of education, and like high quality education. So take it out with it a grain of salt that I'm speaking from kind of my own experience, which has its limitations. And I see healing as a very ongoing and incomplete process. So likewise, this talk and the ideas in it are a draft form as well. And I'll start by talking about what my life looked like growing up to kind of give an idea of what healing has looked like. I grew up kind of with kind of a Chinese American family. My parents moved from China to study in the US in their late 20s. They studied statistics, and we spent the bulk of my childhood growing up in New Jersey in a rural suburban town. I spent a lot of time on the internet because there's nothing else to do. Because my parents were statisticians, we had a lot of emphasis on succeeding in kind of a STEM context in my family. I had two older siblings. We all were very like pushed to succeed academically in like science and math from my parents' influence, because I think that's how they found their success. At the same time, in addition to be very academically oriented, I had like a double life on the internet. I loved kind of participating in online fan art forums. And I guess I was doing digital art from an early age and just like to be creative. And I think these were the sort of ingredients that like academic drive and value, as well as like the kind of interest in making things that led me to apply and study at MIT, which was my dream school. Like I was very shocked to have gotten in. But I realized it was kind of a struggle. I think MIT is notorious for being a very like high pressure environment, not necessarily in like a students are cutthroat with each other kind of way, but you're just like walking in the hallway among people who are like inventing stuff and becoming Nobel laureates and whatnot. And you're like struggling to get C's in classes and like your basic classes. So I think for a lot of people, there's a very constant and pervasive feeling that you're not doing enough, even though you're trying really hard. And I also studied computer science. I originally like hoped it would be kind of a creative medium, but the day-to-day was a little difficult. I think the nature of the curriculum and the more theory-based classes privileged thinking that was more like mathematically oriented, and less so was for people like me who I think wanted to exist more in the world of like stories and emotions and art and whatnot. And I think one of the most difficult times for me was in my junior spring of MIT, where a lot of factors came together to make me feel like kind of really not great about myself and where I was in life. Interpersonal issues, relationship drama, regular college stuff. I also had a lot of difficulty transitioning into product design. I realized I wanted to go into design like halfway through my CS major, but it was really difficult. I feel like there were not really great resources to learn how to apply and build a portfolio. So it was really kind of difficult process for me. I think at this point, more schools are learning to be better equipped to prepare students for stuff like this. And I was doing this all on top of like getting through difficult technical classes or in computer science where I did not know what was happening. However, I see that time in my life as kind of one, hopefully of many of kind of turning points and realizations. Things that helped me move through it was, actually landing a first product design role, even if it wasn't for like a large tech company. I got to work for Girls Who Code, which is a nonprofit that creates programs for high school girls to learn programming over the summer. And what I appreciated was it was a really refreshing context after my kind of traditional like engineering school relationship to tech. It focused a lot on like kind of, they called it like sisterhood and like building creative projects and seeing the applications of coding, not just kind of, the stereotypes of it. I also, in the last year of school, got to reconnect with art again. Once I had finished all my hard technical classes, I, was just like, screw it, I'm going to take kind of classes with free form, open-ended final projects where I can just like kind of make art and express myself. And I also got therapy, more intensive therapy for the first time, and started to see and unlearn a lot of the self-blame that I defaulted to throughout my growing up. And if I were to kind of summarize the shift that I started to feel at this time, I think it was about kind of seeing the bigger picture behind the things that I struggled with, and understanding that I was more like in environments that didn't set me up to thrive, rather than I was struggling because of something inherently wrong with me. So after MIT, I sort of want to continue that momentum and really prioritize my own creative like voice. And I was lucky to be able to study at a 2-year master's for art and technology at a program at NYU called Interactive Telecommunications, or ITP. It's basically a very like outdated, like weird name for kind of just like an art and technology master's. And after my engineering experience, engineering school experience, it felt like a playful kindergarten where you can just like explore and make things that you wanted to make. And I made a lot of projects there, but I'll share kind of two that I think encapsulate the ideas that I was excited to explore. One of the projects during that era was a project called Jackie's Guide to Making a Website. And it was a 28-page comic guide that walks someone through the process of making a website that aligns with their goals and identity. And to give a little bit of background on this, I found this project as sort of like a tribute to my relationship with designing websites for myself throughout kind of the difficulties of college. I really saw like designing and building websites as this simple joy that I could feel confident in, that I could like express myself and channel my own voice in, even if like algorithms classes I couldn't. I saw personal websites as this way to define kind of a narrative for yourself, which can be a very creative and healing process. I feel like when you're tasked to make a website, you have to really think about painting yourself in the best way. You have to confront what is important to you and what your goals are. And I think for people who struggle with a lot of self-doubt and not feeling good enough, like myself, this can be a very healing exercise. So it was this mindset that I really wanted to channel in this comic. So in the guide, I really emphasized kind of the earlier stages of like identifying your identity, your purpose, your goals before you actually like jumped into Figma to design something or wrote any HTML. I made like a lot of like kind of like mind mappy brainstorming exercises that forced you to consider like all the pieces of your life and try to draw patterns and find themes that were important to you. And I think this sort of leads to one of kind of the big lessons that I think like healing work can extend to design work is to really explore before jumping into solutions. I think a lot in kind of mainstream tech culture, there's so much value in just like producing, like innovating and like launching the next big release feature code. And I think it's more and more valuable than ever today to pause, to understand, to like get a narrative and story down before rushing to solutions. And I think the same thing happens in therapy all the time. They're always like, how can we sit with the feelings for longer instead of rushing to make band-aid solutions that don't like work for the long term. During this time in grad school, I was also interested in getting deeper into something called speculative design, which I had briefly touched upon in undergrad, but didn't really get to explore for myself. I'm not sure if any of you have encountered this, but I'll give a quick definition. So speculative design, I explain it as sort of like science fiction, but instead of writing like stories or like making a film about it, you're telling a story through kind of design artifacts. So that could be like physical objects or like a user interface. I think the idea is that you're not necessarily designing in product design, for something that's like addressing a current market need. Instead, you're designing an artifact to tell a story about kind of the social conditions of the world. And it's more about generating discussion rather than solving an immediate problem. And then a lot of them focus on creating like futuristic, like imagining kind of future states of the world, like what would that look like and how you can tell that through kind of an object. And one of the ideas in speculative design is this concept of wicked problems. So these are problems that are like so complex and huge that you can't really solve them with a single like product or tool. And these are like kind of the big sweeping issues like poverty, climate change, institutional racism, education, like hunger. Like these are things that encapsulate like so much and like kind of cross over into every discipline and really evoke kind of how complex and interrelated problems are in the world. So a lot of speculative design will kind of aim to like explore this through the work. And for my thesis at my master's, I was really interested in finding my own approach to speculative design. And particularly, I was interested in understanding kind of the wicked problems in my own life. So, the big sweeping issues that intersected across my upbringing, my experiences in technology and engineering school, and kind of connecting that to how technology is built and designed in the first place. And I was also interested in asking, what does it mean to imagine alternatives for myself, specifically like alternative pasts, and exploring what could have been for younger me. So for my thesis, I reimagined a computing experience for my childhood self based off of values I wish I could have seen in technology, but also in the way I grew up. I created Jackie's OS, which is this kind of web-based speculative operating system for my childhood self. And kind of the values that I base it off of were like, I value the way I am, I have agency, I deserve to have space for my emotions. And what was interesting about this work for me was mapping these values as things that were not only present in, or not only like kind of issues that I had growing up in my childhood, but also kind of issues that resonate with the history, the larger history of technology as a whole. So for example, like, I feel like I learned as a child that I had to like be constantly working to like get into college. Like I couldn't really like relax and take a break, which are kind of capitalist values that are embodied, you know, and like taken for granted. And then in this process of this project, I was also learning about the history of the desktop metaphor for operating systems. Like it came from a history of people viewing computers as this tool to help people be their most productive selves in the office. And that's where the metaphor of the desktop came from. However, we have, it's been there for so long that we've seen it as universal and neutral and have accepted that as kind of the reality of what computing looks like. So I was like, what if the desktop metaphor instead was like a bedroom metaphor, so it could like embody my new values of like relaxing and having fun. So that was one of many design choices I made. And I think what's kind of like philosophically interesting about this project for myself is like asking questions that surround this little alternate timeline. So like, what does the rest of the world look like if computers were designed from a place, weren't designed from a place of like capitalist values? Who would I become today if I had grown up seeing stuff like this? Like, would we still be in a world where Elon Musk is taking over Twitter and doing bad stuff to it? So I was thinking like, I think one of the other kind of lessons from healing into design work is seeing healing as a ripple effect or like a butterfly effect, not like unlike in science fiction movies. So I think I think we should see healing as, and embedding healing values into technologies we build as having profound and reality warping effects that can affect systems at a larger scale. And finally, another point I'd like to make about this project is, again, it's not aiming to solve any real problem in a real way, but rather be a starting point for exploration. So this, like Jackie's OS, was my little alternate timeline and exploration, but I was thinking like, what if more people could do this, could design technology from their values for their past selves, especially for people who have been the most marginalized by technical systems. We could create like a whole like universe of alternate timelines. We can rewrite history in a way and use this as a process to explore what more inclusive futures could look like for technological systems. Yeah, so that's a little bit about my kind of like more exploratory artwork, but I'll kind of bring this back to my other life, product design as well. So I feel like these lessons have influenced the way that I work as a product designer and have a lot to offer into like designing in a more practical industry context as well. Kind of these main ideas that I've been talking about, like the ripple effects of healing and harm, seeing the bigger picture and like kind of the interrelatedness of things, and not jumping into solutions, exploring first. And I argue that like this is like critical in any design work where we want to create more harm or more good than harm. And to sort of illustrate what the ideas I want to share, I just wanted to bring up this article that I read recently. It's called Design Thinking's Most Popular Strategy is BS. And it's written by a tech ethnographer named Trisha Wang. And basically in this article, she's going through the history of like the how might we prompt, which I'm sure a lot of you might be familiar with if you've taken like a kind of a design thinking course. This prompt came from Procter and Gamble, like the soap company in the 70s, where they were trying to do corporate innovation to make a more competitive soap. So they used that as a prompt to like get out of the box. And it has been since spread over the years and co-opted and kind of taken for granted as this like kind of universal holy grail process at places like Google and IDEO. But I think what's interesting is that Wang says that there's nothing wrong with the question itself, but often the context in which it's used. And she explains that often this prompt is used in contexts where the problem is more larger and more complicated than just like what like a little product design team can solve. And often these teams are led by like white men who like can't like don't have the lived experience to kind of recognize like these larger systemic factors that go into these issues. And that's where a lot of the kind of difficulties of this used as a framework come into play. We can't, for example, apply the same tools we use to innovate on soap to solving problems like systemic racism, for example. But this happens like all the time in product design. And as an anecdote, she shares the history of the Jewel, which, was designed by two white men who applied kind of a how might we framework around making smoking safer, and also addressing the stigma they felt about being smokers. And sure, the design process may have solved that problem that they were looking at, but the result was inadvertently creating a product that resulted in more youth getting addicted to nicotine. So I think if they had designed this with like the framework of healing, for example, they might have recognized that the problems that they were designing around were more complex. They might have had the foresight to see the kind of inadvertent effects that kind of were outside the main issue that they were, solving. And if they, for example, had also confronted their own shame around smoking, instead of jumping to do the Band-Aid solution to create something that made that shame go away from them, they may have not created a product that has ended up arguably creating more harm in different ways. And lastly, I won't go too deep into this for time reasons, but also share some reflections about the kind of social impact related design work that I've done in education and nonprofits, and the ways that I am trying to push myself to think more critically about the work that we're all doing. I spent parts of my grad school experience also working at Codecademy as a product designer. Codecademy is the website where you can learn to code directly on the web platform, and it's very much geared towards beginners. And I would say that the wicked problem that they're exploring is like broadening technological literacy and making technology more equitable. And as a designer, I think there's some aspects that I see in this work that are interesting around cultural change. One of the things that they really do is like try to use language and teach in a way that's as beginner friendly as possible, which can feel very liberating compared to a lot of history of tech being like, and resources being gatekept. At the same time, I think thinking bigger picture challenges us to question programming education as this end-all be-all solution for equity, because there's countless other barriers to equity in the tech workforce beyond just like the skills, learning the skills, for example. And then finally, I'll talk a little about schoolhouse.world. This is the current company that I'm working at. It's a very small startup. It's where I had the great experience of having Jennifer as my intern this summer, and also how I found out about this speaker series through. Schoolhouse is a peer-to-peer platform for tutoring. So if you're a high schooler, you can tutor another high schooler over Zoom, and we'll like certify and train you. And we're I guess the wicked problem that we're dealing with is like broadening access to high quality education and opportunities. And we are doing that through trying to change the culture of giving and getting help and normalize getting help from another student as something that's should be encouraged, especially in a world where a lot of tutoring is also gatekept through, paid tutoring. So I think that's kind of one of the most interesting things culturally as like cultural work that we're doing in this organization. At the same time, I think it's also important to recognize the scale and kind of the complexities of democratizing education as a problem space, and recognize that, one tech platform can only do so much. I think we also need better funding for education. We need to see educational systems as interrelated with policing and racism in the prison industrial school complex in the United States in particular, for true and lasting change to be made. So I'll just leave with some takeaways. A lot of this is like kind of reiterating points that I've made already, but like in terms of ripple effects, I really believe that having kind of greater self-awareness and being on a healing journey at a personal level makes you better equipped to doing work that's about healing at community and systemic levels, and being better equipped to creating technology as a whole. In terms of seeing the bigger picture, I think kind of concrete takeaway is like have the humility to know when you need to bring other people's expertise in, whether that's from other domains and disciplines outside of product design, and especially center experiences from the people who experience these harms directly. And finally, in terms of like solutionism, I think people in tech in general can urge themselves to question to what extent can tech solutions address these complex social problems, not as a way to say that we shouldn't try solving them at all, but just to acknowledge to what extent is the problem solved and what else needs to be done. And finally, kind of a last thing that I tacked on last minute is centering joy. This is a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, who's an activist and a writer. She writes a lot about kind of social justice movements, but also the importance of centering joy and pleasure within it, because that's what we are trying to move to in the end. So yeah, thank you so much. Hopefully, I don't think I went too over time. These are my socials if you want to add me or keep up with all the weird stuff that I do. I can stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Jackie. So now we're just going to open up the floor for anyone who has any questions. So you can either like type it in the chat or add it to the Slido link.
I think there's one question that I can speak to.
Yeah, for sure.
Someone asked, what do you think was the most tangible benefit from your master's? So I didn't go into my master's thinking like, oh, it's gonna like teach me all these tech skills. I think what I wanted to do was build my own artistic voice and find community. And I think the making connections in New York was the biggest thing. I didn't really know what the art and technology space looked like in New York, but I think what's nice about my program is like there's a lot of kind of roots in like other kind of institutions and like collectives that come out of my program specifically. And over the years, I've really felt like the art and technology space in New York is a very like small and tight-knit community that's like also very supportive. What advice would you give to young designers trying to break into the field? I guess there's a lot of things. I think maybe this resonates with the nature of my work, but I really believe in having creating a really opinionated role portfolio as a designer, and being really opinionated with what kind of work you want to do. I think some people it's a strategy to make your work as generalized to any sort of industry, but sometimes when you try to make yourself too general, you're also not speaking to anything in particular. So yeah, really hone into what matters to you, and I think that will connect you with the opportunities that you care about. Which code languages okay, I'll pass it off. Web programming is also helpful.
We have someone raising their hand. So Rachel, do you want to just unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much. I am just kind of thinking about after this master's, and it sounds like it was a really good experience in finding your voice, but then I'm curious, and I think you kind of allude to this by the projects that you choose after that, but how do you maintain that voice through the work that you do while allowing for the change that naturally happens as your identity shifts? That's a quite a big question, but I'm just curious on your take on that.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of complex. I'll try to ramble very quickly, but I think what I've realized is my work is very much about healing myself, expressing myself, trying to create the world that I wanted as a kid. And right now that looks like making really playful stuff, things that I wanted 12-year-old me would have loved to see. But I think what's helpful for me is healing is an ongoing process. I'm allowed to shift my identity based off of what I need and the type of person that I want to explore. So I think I'm not trying to just lean into what I'm interested in right now, and say that there's room for things to change. I don't know if that answers. I don't want to take up too much space. I know there's another speaker.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie, again. If there's any more questions, please, everyone, don't hesitate to reach out to her. And